I wish I could tell you that my marriage was perfect, that after 12 years together, Kate and I were still that annoyingly happy couple you see in movies, the kind that makes you believe in soulmates and fairy tale endings. And maybe that's what it looked like from the outside. 2 kids, a nice house, family dinners on Sundays. But anyone who's been married long enough knows that nothing's ever as simple as it looks, and things can change fast. For me, it started with small things, almost like whispers in the wind, the type of things you could brush off as normal. Until they weren't. It was about 8 months ago when I started to sense something. At first, I thought it was just in my head. I never pictured myself as the jealous type, and I trusted Kate, or at least I used to. But damn, she started changing right in front of me. Kate had always been a creature of habit. She had her routines. Monday was Pilates, Wednesday was book club, Friday was our movie night after we put the kids to bed. But then, those routines suddenly started shifting. She began going out more often, sometimes 2, 3 times a week, and always with some excuse ready to go. She'd say things like, "Oh, I'm meeting the girls from yoga," or "We're doing a late-night run at the gym." And I wanted to believe her. I really did. But there was something in her eyes, maybe excitement or guilt, that made it hard to swallow. I remember one time, she came home from one of those girls' nights, and I swear, it was like a different woman walked through the door. There was this look of satisfaction on her face, like she'd just had the best night of her life. And all I could think was, what the hell did I miss? She'd be all distant and cold, barely saying a word to me or the kids. If I asked how her night was, she'd shrug me off with a half-hearted, "It was fine," and head straight for the shower. Then she'd lock herself in the bathroom for what felt like an eternity. I'd never been the type to snoop, but in those moments, I could feel the paranoia creeping in like an itch I couldn't scratch. And the phone! Oh man, don't get me started on that. It was glued to her hand like it held the secrets of the universe. I swear, even when she was cooking dinner, it'd be there on the counter, screen down, buzzing constantly. I knew something was up when one day, she gets this message, and her whole face changes, like she's been caught red-handed, and she deletes it so fast, I barely had time to register what happened. I asked her, "Who was that?" trying to keep my voice casual, but she just laughed it off. "Oh, no one. Just spam," she said, her voice a little too high-pitched, a little too forced. But I let it go, for that night at least. I know what you're thinking. If I was so suspicious, why didn't I just call her out on it? But you gotta understand, when you've shared your life with someone for that long, it's hard to just flip a switch and assume the worst. Kate and I had history, good history. We weren't just husband and wife. We were partners, best friends. Or at least, that's what I thought. So, I did what any loving husband would do to save his marriage. I tried to fix it. I figured maybe we were in a rut. Maybe she was just stressed from work. Maybe it was one of those phases that couples go through. So I planned this surprise weekend getaway, just the 2 of us. I even called her boss to clear her schedule for a Friday off, booked a nice little cabin out in the mountains, got a babysitter lined up for the kids. I was pumped, ready to whisk her away and rekindle whatever flame had gone dim. And when I told her, she didn't look happy, surprised, or anything close to what I'd hoped for. Instead, she just looked annoyed. "I can't," she said, barely making eye contact. "Work is crazy right now. I have to be in the office all weekend." My heart sank. It wasn't just the words. It was how easily they rolled off her tongue, like she didn't even have to think about the lie. She didn't even bother to pretend to be disappointed. That night, I sat on the couch after she went to bed, staring at the blank TV screen, my mind racing. I kept replaying our entire marriage in my head, trying to pinpoint when things started to go south. And the worst part? I couldn't figure it out. All I knew was that my wife, the woman I thought I'd spend the rest of my life with, was slipping away, and I had no idea how to bring her back. By then, things between us were getting tense. She'd get defensive over the smallest questions. If I asked what time she'd be home, she'd snap back. "Why? Do you need to control every second of my life?" We started fighting more, and not the usual bickering about who left the dishes out or forgot to pick up the dry cleaning. No, These were full-blown arguments with yelling and slammed doors. And every time, I'd sit there afterward feeling like the bad guy, like maybe I was just losing my mind. The worst part about suspicion? It's like a poison that slowly drips into everything you do. And the more I let it consume me, the more I felt like a stranger in my own life. Every good morning felt fake. Every kiss before bed felt forced. And man, I tried to keep it together, but it was like trying to hold back a damn avalanche. Eventually I cracked, but not the way you'd think. One night, I sat there, staring at Kate as she scrolled through her phone, that same sly smile playing on her lips, and I just couldn't take it anymore. I needed to talk to someone who'd give me the truth. No sugarcoating, no BS. That's when I decided to call Molly. She was one of Kate's closest friends, but she'd also been a part of our lives since the early days of our marriage. I figured if anyone would know if I was losing my mind, it'd be her. Molly and I met up at this little coffee shop, the kind that's loud enough to drown out a serious conversation, but not so loud that you can't hear yourself think. I was nervous as hell, and I'm sure she could tell. I mean, what husband sits down with his wife's best friend and says, "Hey, I think my wife's cheating on me?" It felt ridiculous. But when the words finally left my mouth, the way Molly's eyes went wide told me that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't completely crazy. "Alex, are you sure? Kate? I mean, she's always been so, devoted. She loves you and the kids. I've never seen her. This just doesn't sound like her." That was Molly's first reaction, disbelief, maybe a little bit of denial. And I got it. Hell, I didn't want to believe it either. But as we kept talking, I started spilling everything. The weird nights out, the deleted messages, her sudden temper. By the time I was done, Molly sat there, biting her lip, looking like she'd just heard some terrible secret. "Okay," she finally said, leaning in close like we were spies on a secret mission. "I don't want to make you paranoid, but I have noticed something. She's just been different lately, more distant." She looked down at her cup, stirring her coffee like it held all the answers. "But if we're going to figure this out, we need proof. Real proof." And that's when Molly suggested it. The GPS tracker. My stomach did a flip just hearing those words. I mean, come on? Who does that? It felt like crossing a line, like admitting my marriage was really that messed up. But deep down, I knew that I couldn't keep living in the dark, torturing myself with what-ifs. So, yeah, I agreed. And that night, we planted it in the glove compartment of Kate's car, hidden where she'd never think to look. Those next few weeks, they were the longest of my life. Every day, I'd watch the tracker app on my phone, watching those little red dots appear on the map, tracing her movements like some kind of detective. And let me tell you, it was exhausting. I'd watch her drive to work in the morning, all normal, nothing weird. And then in the evening, that's when things got messy. She'd go off the grid, making stops in random neighborhoods, and sometimes she'd park at these motels for hours. Hours! And every time I saw that red dot stop outside a motel, my heart would sink. What the hell was she doing there? Who was she meeting? I tried to rationalize it. Maybe she was visiting a friend. Maybe there was some explanation that would make sense. But as the days went by and the pattern repeated, I knew I was running out of excuses to make. Molly would check in with me every few days, asking if I'd found anything, and I'd tell her what I'd seen, each time feeling sicker than the last. I even started driving by some of those places myself, trying to catch a glimpse of whatever was going on. There was one day in particular that I'll never forget. I'd followed the tracker's route and found Kate's car parked in the lot of this cheap, sleazy-looking motel on the outskirts of town. It was one of those places you wouldn't stay unless you had no other options, the kind of place that screams affair. I pulled up a couple of spaces down, keeping my distance. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold my phone steady, but I managed to snap a few photos of her car. For a while, I just sat there, staring at the entrance of the motel, waiting, hoping to see her walk out alone. But she never did. After an hour or so, I left, feeling like the biggest idiot on the planet. But I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't in my head. This wasn't just paranoia. Something was seriously wrong. Back at home, things were tense. I couldn't look at Kate the same way. Every time she laughed or smiled, it felt fake, like a mask she was wearing to cover up whatever was really going on. And she knew something was up with me too. How could she not? I'd get short with her over the smallest things, picking fights just to see how she'd react. But instead of calming my suspicions, all it did was push us further apart. Then one day, the tracker led me to a familiar spot, a restaurant we used to go to when we first started dating. I watched the little red dot move on my screen, my heart pounding, and sure enough, it stopped in the parking lot. I got in my car and drove like a madman to get there, hoping to catch her in the act. But by the time I arrived, her car was gone, like she'd just vanished into thin air. I sat in that parking lot, staring at the empty space where she'd been, feeling like the world's biggest fool. That night, I told Molly everything. I don't know how much more of this I can take, I said, my voice barely a whisper over the phone. She's hiding something, I know it. Alex, you have to be strong, Molly replied. This is going to get ugly before it gets better. But you deserve to know the truth. And she was right. I couldn't confront Kate yet. Not without solid proof. So, I started going through the GPS logs, trying to piece together her movements, looking for patterns, places she visited often. And each time I found one of those mystery locations, I'd go there, take photos, document everything. It was like I was preparing for a trial, building a case against my own wife. I'd spend hours at night, sitting in front of my laptop, poring over maps and logs like some crazed investigator. And the more I uncovered, the closer I got to the truth. A truth I wasn't ready to face, but one I knew was coming. There's a moment when everything in your gut screams that something is wrong, and you just know that if you don't find out the truth right then and there, it'll eat you alive. That moment hit me one evening when I'd had enough of staring at GPS logs and blurry photos of motel parking lots. I had to see it for myself. I had to see her. I waited until she left that night. She'd given me some excuse about meeting up with a friend for drinks, which wasn't even creative anymore. At that point, I was tired of pretending to believe her lies. I just nodded and watched her go, acting like it didn't bother me, like I was some clueless husband who had no idea what his wife was really up to. The second she was out of the driveway, I was in my car, following at a distance, headlights off, doing my best to stay invisible. It didn't take long. She drove across town to this little hole-in-the-wall bar, the kind of place where you go to drink away your problems, not catch up with friends. I parked a few cars down, close enough to see, but far enough not to be noticed. And then I saw him. This guy, tall, maybe mid-30s, a little scruffy looking, walks up to Kate like they'd been waiting for this moment all day. And the way she lit up when she saw him, man, I hadn't seen her smile like that in years. I watched as they hugged, held onto each other just a little too long for comfort, and sat at a table in the corner, all cozy and intimate. My whole body went numb. My wife, my Kate, the woman I thought I knew better than anyone, was sitting there with some random dude, laughing, touching his arm, leaning in close like they were sharing secrets. And every laugh, every touch felt like a punch to the gut. I wanted to storm in there, flip the table, and ask her right then who the hell he was and what the hell she thought she was doing. But I couldn't move. I just sat there, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I pulled out my phone and snapped a few photos of them together, trying to hold the camera steady even though my hands were shaking like a leaf. It was surreal watching the life I thought I had crumble right in front of my eyes, and all I could do was watch. A part of me kept thinking, maybe it's not what it looks like. Maybe there's some explanation that will make sense when you hear it. But deep down I knew. I'd known for months. After about an hour, they left the bar together, walking out like they owned the night. I followed them for a bit, hoping to see where they were going, hoping to get something more concrete, but they went their separate ways. I drove home in silence, my mind racing, replaying every detail of what I'd seen. I knew I couldn't keep this bottled up anymore. I had to confront her. I had to hear her side of the story, whatever bullshit that was going to be. When she got home, I was waiting in the living room, my heart pounding like a drum. "How was your night?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Fine," she said, not even looking at me as she tossed her bag on the couch and headed for the kitchen. "Who was the guy?" I asked, trying to sound casual, like it was just a passing thought, even though it felt like life or death. She froze, her back to me, and for a split second, I thought I saw panic in her eyes. But when she turned around, she was all calm, collected. "What guy?" she asked, playing dumb like she didn't have a clue what I was talking about. "Don't do this, Kate," I said, standing up, my voice rising despite my best efforts to stay calm. "I saw you tonight. With that guy, Trevor, or whatever his name is. I saw you." She rolled her eyes, and the look on her face, like I was the one being ridiculous, made my blood boil. "Trevor's just a friend," she said, folding her arms across her chest. "He's going through a tough time, and we were just catching up." "Jesus, Alex, are you seriously following me now? What the hell is wrong with you?" "What's wrong with me?" I shouted, feeling my control slipping away. "You've been lying to me, sneaking around, and you expect me to just sit here and act like everything's fine? I saw the way you were with him, Kate. That's not just a friend." She shook her head, laughing, actually laughing like the whole thing was some kind of joke. "Oh, please. You're overreacting. I can't have any friends without you losing your mind. Maybe if you weren't so damn controlling all the time, I wouldn't have to go out just to get a break from you." And that's when the fight started. Big, ugly, screaming matches where nothing was off limits. Every pent-up frustration, every resentment we'd buried over the years came flying out like a storm. And it didn't matter what we fought about, money, the kids, work, it all came back to the same thing. I'd accuse her of cheating, and she'd turn it around on me, saying I was suffocating her, trying to play the victim like she was the one being wronged. It was maddening, and I felt like I was losing my mind, getting dragged into her twisted game where up was down and right was wrong. But even after all that, she wouldn't admit anything. "You're crazy," she'd say. "Paranoid. You're just trying to control me." She was good at playing the innocent, at pretending like she was the one under attack. And after every fight, she'd act like nothing had happened, like we hadn't just torn each other apart. But I couldn't let it go. I knew that Trevor wasn't just some friend, and I knew there were more secrets she was hiding. So I did what I had to do. I hired a private investigator. I needed someone who could get me the truth, who could dig where I couldn't, and find whatever skeletons Kate was hiding in her closet. And as much as it killed me to do it, I knew it was the only way to get the answers I needed. The guy I hired was this old-school PI, the kind you'd see in those classic detective movies. Trench coat, thick mustache, a no-nonsense attitude. He was straightforward, told me not to expect miracles, but he'd get me what he could. It felt weird, like something out of a bad movie, hiring a stranger to spy on my wife. But by then, I'd crossed so many lines that one more didn't seem to matter. The first week was uneventful. Nothing out of the ordinary, just her usual stops. Nothing that screamed affair. But then the reports started coming in. Photos, times, places. Kate meeting up with Trevor at different bars, different restaurants. The way they'd sit close, hold hands when they thought no one was looking. And then other guys, names I'd never heard before, faces that made my stomach turn. The more evidence the PI collected, the more I realized Trevor wasn't the only one. My wife wasn't just having an affair. She was living a double life, one that I had no part of, one that I'd been blind to for far too long. And every new piece of evidence felt like another nail in the coffin of our marriage. The hardest part was keeping it all inside, pretending like I didn't know, like everything was normal. I'd sit across from her at dinner, watching her smile at the kids, and all I could think about was who she was going to meet once they were in bed. It was like I was living with a stranger, and every day, the distance between us grew wider. When I hired the PI, I thought I was ready to hear the truth, ugly as it might be. I figured there'd be some affair, maybe a fling that had gotten out of hand, but what came back hit me like a freight train. Trevor was just the start of something much bigger, and it didn't take long for the pieces to fall apart. Every few days, the PI would send me updates, photos, texts, places she'd been. It felt like the hits just kept coming. Turns out my wife was meeting more than just one man. There were others. One young enough to be mistaken for a college kid, and another much older, well-dressed like some business guy. and the interactions between her and each of them were different. Intimate, playful, sometimes downright romantic. She had become this whole new person with each guy, almost like she was changing masks every night. Then came the shocker, the dating profile. The PI found her on some exclusive app, the kind people use for secret hookups. She had a whole new identity there, called herself Lana, with photos I'd never seen before. The ones that left little to the imagination, taken in outfits I'd never seen her wear around me. Her profile read like someone I didn't even know. Adventurous, seeking excitement, no strings attached. The realization hit me like a punch in the gut. This wasn't a misunderstanding or some mistake. This was who she'd become. The PI didn't stop there. He found out about private parties, secret gatherings I'd never known about. And then came the name that turned my stomach. Michael. I'd met Michael before, back when he worked with Kate. We'd had drinks together, grilled steaks in my backyard. The whole time, he was just another face at the office to me, just another work friend. But now, he was much more. Thursday nights, like clockwork, she'd see him, and it wasn't for business meetings. I tried asking around, close friends, people who might know what was going on, but the silence was deafening. No one wanted to talk, and that only made the whole situation feel worse, like I was the last to know about this sick joke of a double life my wife was leading. People just avoided eye contact, dodged questions like they'd all been coached. And all the while, Kate carried on like nothing was wrong, laughing over dinner, tucking our kids into bed like she wasn't hiding a mountain of lies. She looked happier than ever, as if some weight had been lifted from her shoulders. It was infuriating to watch, to see her living so freely while I struggled just to get through the day. Nights were the worst. I couldn't sleep, couldn't shake the images of her out there with other men, smiling, touching, doing God knows what. But I had to keep up the act, at least until I had everything I needed. I kept the PI on retainer, getting more proof. I wanted to confront her with everything, to leave her no room for denial. It wasn't going to be just about Trevor. It was about all of it. The men, the parties, the lies. And that moment was coming soon. I was ready to bring her double life crashing down, to expose the woman she'd become. But what I didn't see coming was that one last piece, the twist that would change everything and blow this whole thing wide open. And when that hit, all hell would break loose. The night I decided I was finally going to confront Kate was a night I'd been planning for weeks. The PI had done his job. I had all the evidence, the photos, the messages, everything to expose her lies. I was ready to lay it all out, to see her face when she realized she couldn't wriggle out of this one. But life has a way of blindsiding you when you least expect it. Just as I was about to pull the trigger, I got a call from the PI, a call that made my blood run cold. He told me that one of Kate's lovers, Trevor, had just been diagnosed as HIV positive. It felt like the world stopped spinning. All those nights Kate had come home late, all those lies about meeting friends, all those times she'd slipped into bed next to me without a word. It all came rushing back in one sickening wave. I could feel my hands shaking, my voice breaking as I spoke to the investigator, trying to grasp what this meant for me, for our family. If Trevor had HIV, what did that mean for Kate? And what did that mean for me? I didn't have time to be scared. I only had time to act. I drove home like a man possessed, not caring if I ran a red light or broke every speed limit on the way. I needed answers, and I needed them now. When I burst through the front door, Kate was on the couch, scrolling through her phone like it was any other night. She didn't even look up at first, and that made my blood boil even more. Get in the car. I snapped, trying to keep my voice steady. We're going to the clinic. What are you talking about? She said, frowning up at me. What's going on? I said, get in the damn car. I wasn't playing games, and she could see it in my eyes. After a tense standoff, she finally followed me outside. I could feel the rage radiating off of her, but I didn't care. This wasn't about her anymore. This was about the truth, and I was going to drag it out into the light, whether she liked it or not. The drive to the clinic was dead silent, but the tension was electric. She kept glancing at me, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and confusion, but I didn't give her anything. I kept my eyes on the road, my hands gripping the wheel so tight I could feel the blood rushing to my knuckles. When we arrived, I told her exactly what I knew. You need to take an HIV test. Now! I watched her face closely, searching for any flicker of guilt, of panic. But instead, she just looked angry, like I'd accused her of something unforgivable. You're insane, she spat. Why would you think I need an HIV test? You're the one who's been acting paranoid and controlling. For all I know, you're the one who's sick. Don't play games with me, Kate. I growled. Trevor has HIV. You know damn well who I'm talking about. Now, get tested. She didn't fight me anymore. Maybe she saw that there was no point. Maybe she was just scared of what would come out. But when the test results came back, it was exactly what I feared. She was positive. HIV positive. My wife, the woman who had been living a double life behind my back, had been exposed to a virus that could change both our lives forever. And that's when she lost it. She tried to pin the blame on me, claiming I was the one who must have brought it home. She accused me of making up stories, of trying to ruin her life for no reason. It was like a switch flipped inside of her. Any semblance of the woman I knew was gone, replaced by someone who would say anything, do anything, to avoid responsibility. Maybe if you weren't so boring, she hissed at one point. Maybe if you actually cared about what I wanted, this wouldn't have happened. But no, all you do is watch me, follow me, suffocate me. It's no wonder I wanted more. Those words cut deep, but I wasn't about to let her off the hook. I laid it all out, the evidence, the affairs, the profile on the dating app. And as I spoke, she started to realize that she couldn't lie her way out of this one. She was cornered. And when the realization hit, all that anger turned to fear. But not the kind of fear you'd expect. No, it wasn't fear for me or the kids. It was fear for herself, for the mess she'd created, the life she'd thrown away. And then she tried to hide it, tried to keep the truth from spreading. Please, Alex, she begged, grabbing my arm. We don't have to tell anyone. No one needs to know. I can handle this. I'll get treatment. Just please don't make this worse. I could hardly look at her. Worse, I said, laughing bitterly. You think this isn't already worse? But hiding wasn't an option. I knew that, and she knew that too. If she was HIV positive, then the men she'd been with, the men who had wives and families, they needed to know. They all deserved the truth, as awful as it was. So, I did what I had to do. I reached out to the ones I could find, contacted the wives, laid it all out as carefully as I could. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done, telling these women that their husbands, men they loved, men they trusted, had been sleeping with my wife and might be infected. The fallout was immediate. Lives shattered, just like mine had. I remember one woman breaking down on the phone, her voice trembling as she thanked me for telling her the truth, even though it was a truth that would tear her world apart. And with every call, every conversation, Kate's betrayals felt heavier, more monstrous. She hadn't just broken our family. She dragged others into the mess, leaving wreckage wherever she went. The house was a war zone after that. I couldn't stand to look at her, and she wouldn't take responsibility for anything. It was a constant cycle, her denying, blaming, deflecting, and me trying to wrap my head around how my life had gone so far off the rails. I don't think anyone ever really imagines what it's going to be like to confront the person who shattered your world. You think you know how it'll go down, the words you'll say, the anger you'll unleash, but when the time finally came for me, none of it went the way I'd pictured. When I gathered all the evidence, laid it out in front of Kate like a prosecutor presenting a case, I thought she'd crumble, apologize, maybe even beg for forgiveness. But no, that's not how it went down. Instead, it became a full-blown battle, one last desperate attempt by Kate to save face. She stood there, staring down at the photos, the messages, the tracker logs. I could see the color drain from her face, see the lies swirling behind her eyes as she tried to come up with some new excuse. But there was no escape this time. What do you have to say for yourself? I demanded. my voice steady but full of venom. "I know everything, Kate. All of it. You can't lie your way out of this." For a second, I saw fear, real, raw fear. But then, just as quickly, she flipped the switch. "So, this is what you've been doing? Spying on me? Following me around like some psycho? No wonder I couldn't stand being around you." Her voice was shrill, her words biting. It was the same old game: deflect, blame, turn everything back on me. "Are you seriously blaming me right now?" I shouted. "After all the lies, all the cheating, you're going to stand there and act like you're the victim?" "What did you expect, Alex?" she spat back. "You're boring, you never listen, and all you care about is work, work, work. Maybe if you'd paid attention to me, I wouldn't have needed to look elsewhere." It was like she was throwing gasoline on a fire that was already out of control. My hands shook with rage as I pointed to the evidence. "This isn't looking elsewhere, Kate. This is an entire second life. You lied to me. You lied to our kids. You've destroyed everything, and you're going to stand there and say it's my fault." She paced the room, her hands in her hair, looking like a cornered animal. And then came the threats. "You want to ruin my life? Fine, I'll ruin yours too," she hissed. "I'll take the kids, the house, everything. You'll have nothing left when I'm done with you. You think you could just walk away from this? Think again." It was one of those moments where you realize there's nothing left to salvage. Any love, any respect, any hope that she'd show some kind of remorse was gone. All that was left was anger, bitterness, and a resolve to move on without her. "You can try to take everything," I told her, "but I'm done playing your game." And with that, it was over. No more screaming, no more pleading. Just silence. Cold, deafening silence that filled every room of that house we once called home. That's when Molly stepped in. She was the one steady hand I could rely on through the whole mess. I never expected that Kate's best friend would become my biggest supporter, but Molly was there for me, helping me organize the divorce proceedings, sorting out the legal side of things. She wasn't just a friend, she was a lifeline. While Kate tried to cling to her old life, spiraling deeper into denial and despair, Molly was there, making sure I stayed on track, keeping me grounded when it all felt like too much. The divorce process was brutal, messier than I'd ever imagined. Kate fought tooth and nail for everything: the house, the custody, the bank accounts. But every time she threw a punch, I was ready to counter. I knew her tactics, knew how she twisted things, and I made sure my lawyer was ready for every trick she tried to pull. And as much as she hated it, she knew I had all the leverage, the truth, the evidence, the whole disgusting story. In the end, she didn't win. Sure, there was a price to pay, but she didn't get to walk away with the life she'd expected. And then, slowly, the dust started to settle. With the divorce finalized, I moved out, leaving behind a house full of memories. Some good, some bad, but all tainted now by what I knew. I got my own place, something smaller but comfortable, and I started to focus on what mattered: my kids, my work, and rebuilding the parts of my life that Kate had torn apart. At first, it felt like walking through quicksand. There were days I'd wake up and just sit there, staring at the walls, wondering how everything had gone so wrong. But then I'd think of the kids, how they needed me to be strong, how they needed a father who wasn't broken by all this. And little by little, I found myself again. I started going out more, reconnecting with old friends, picking up hobbies I'd let go of when I was too busy being the perfect husband. It wasn't easy. It's never easy to look back and realize the person you loved, the person you shared your life with, was never who you thought they were. But the further I got from the wreckage of that marriage, the more I started to see that it wasn't all bad. I'd been given a second chance, a chance to rebuild, to find out who I was without Kate's shadow looming over me. I met people who supported me, who reminded me what it was like to be around people who didn't lie, didn't cheat, didn't play mind games. And yeah, there were moments when I'd think about her, think about the life we were supposed to have. But I was moving on. I was letting go. I was finding peace.